These have been crazy times. I don't have to tell anybody here about that. We, this year in particular, have lived with a lot of violent thoughts, a lot of violent words, and a lot of violent deeds. And let's be clear about this. These issues of gender and class and race are not new issues for us in America. They have been part and parcel of our experience. Think segregation, think slavery, think the inability of poor white men to vote. So as we ponder a lot of the issues that we are currently thinking about, a few weeks ago I had the great opportunity to talk to a friend of mine who has been in the peace and justice movement for 70 years, a colleague of Martin Luther King. So I asked him, I said, tell me from your perspective, where are we right now? What do you think? And he said something really, really interesting to me. He said, you know, what I think is that the grand experiment in democracy that was started in 1775 is still continuing. Yes, it is messy, it is fragile, it is difficult, but it's continuing. This push for inclusion is continuing. And I thought that was really powerful. He said something else that I thought was interesting. He said that in order for us to have a really peaceful society, we needed to have more women at the table. We needed balance between men and women in the world and their level of influence. And I thought that was also very interesting. So before I begin to talk about these aspects of how we are able to harness our lives as women, I want to ask you to give me a show of hands. How many people here have ever felt like, I'm not good enough? How many people have said, I'm really not smart enough? How many people have said, I'm really not capable enough? I see lots of hands. Mine are up as well. I say this because I want to share with you something that I got from Maya Angelou, and I know she would want me to share it with you. I had the opportunity to be with her for just one evening, and she said something really profound. She said, we are all brilliant enough. We are all brilliant enough. So that's where I want to start first, because I think as people and as women in particular, we have to first start with appreciating ourselves, moving on to appreciating our circle around us, and then appreciating the world around us. So my first experience with somebody who empowered herself was with my grandmother. My grandmother, Laura Ray Young, lived in Kentucky in a segregated time. Most of her life was spent in segregation. And she married my grandfather, who served in a segregated army. She had a son who served in a segregated army. Now, you want to talk about anger these days? I don't see how she dealt with her anger to know that the men in her life were willing to give up their lives for this country and yet couldn't eat at the diner down the road. How do you do that? And yet she lived this world with dignity. One quick story. When my mother and her sister were girls, they went into the small town of Simpsonville, Kentucky, about 2 miles from where the family home was. And there were 2 signs. One said, colored women. The other said, white ladies. Now, my grandmother was very dignified, held herself high, and so she said to her girls, well, girls, we are ladies, aren't we? So let's go to the white ladies' room. You know, this was a very powerful message because she had to empower herself in this very difficult world that she lived in. But it's a power I think serves me to this day, and I think can serve everybody, because no matter what, to be able to live with dignity, to not let the circumstances drag you so low, is really, really important. Then I think the whole idea of being able to respect the people that are in our circle. Maybe it's the guy who brings us our groceries, or somebody we've met very casually at a friend's house, or our spouse. And I think you'll find, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's very easy to judge the people who are closest to us, right? I'm hearing people shaking their heads, right? Because, there's something like, well, we don't like what they're thinking, we don't, that kind of thing, where we separate ourselves. And that separation can become really dangerous because we're isolating ourselves. I'll give you my personal example. I was working in New York at NBC, and I had done a program, and my boss at the time was really kind of against the tenor of this program. And we were like voting for the good guys, and he was voting for the bad guys, I felt. So I was really angry. And I thought, what's wrong with this guy? And at the time, I decided I would get a little help to give me some insight. And so the woman I talked to, a mentor of mine, she said, you know what, Bonnie, you're right. You're absolutely right. She said, but you need to get close to him. I thought, close to him? What is she talking about? How can I get close to him? He's wrong. But I began to think about it, and I began to realize that he was responding to me the way I felt about him. That I, in my heart, really denigrated him as a human being, which is very different than agreeing with what he said. I didn't agree with what he said, but I still had this feeling of denigration. And I vowed right then and there that I would not be the kind of person that would do that to anybody. And so the next day I walked into his office, and he said, I just wanted to communicate with you. And on the scale of 1 to 10, you're a 12. This was a complete transformation for me because I had to switch how I was feeling inside. And once I did that, then his response to me was so very, very different. Now, in terms of creating community, learning how to build community, I think women have particular assets that are well equipped for that. I think we do tend to, protect the nest, if you will. And I want to see from the hands of women here in particular, how many of you have gone to a party, for example, with a male counterpart, and you come back from that event together with your male counterpart, and you guys have had totally different experiences in that room? How many people, okay, right? Because he can be there the whole evening, and he is not getting what you have picked up in the first 5-10 minutes. Am I right? Right, exactly, right? Because in 5 to 10 minutes, you have figured out from your scoping out the situation what the dynamics are emotionally of people, right? Yes, right? And he's just not there. So these are skill sets which scientists actually say we do have. We read emotions. Our peripheral vision is greater, right? And now as we are entering the workforce, and also as the economies are changing into a more collaborative form, an innovation form, we can use these skills. And all that's great. We need to do more of it. We need more women at the table to create this. But I want to say one thing further that's so important, and that is, what is our relationship to our global community? Can we strengthen the bonds between us and people that live in other countries? Because I think at the end of the day, our capacity to love other people's children as our own is a thing that is going to save us all. I know, as the mother of 2 sons, how passionate a mother's love can be. But that passion cannot end with my own children. It is not okay for children in Syria to be eating leaves. It is not okay for countless generations of children in Africa to have known nothing else but war. We cannot say we have victory if these things are continuing on our watch. And I believe that if we can look in the faces of children, whether they're from Kosovo or Kansas, from Tehran to Tennessee, if we can look in those faces and see the faces of our children, we will know what to do. We will take the right action. So, what is the time we're in? Martin Luther King said, Procrastination is the thief of time. Today is tomorrow. So the time is on our watch. What are we going to do? I say the time is now. We know what to do. We have it in our hearts, and we have it in our capabilities. We can start in this room, in the sound of my voice, to take responsibility for the burden of knowing. When we love other people's children as though they were our own, it will be the time to do what is right. Thank you.